Ethan only meant it as a joke when he asked his maid how she'd fix his billions. He didn't expect her to look him dead in the eye and say, "First, I'd save you from your own money." By the time the first light slid between the glass towers of Manhattan, Ethan Cole was already awake, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse like it was a contract he couldn't get out of. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the New York skyline, the kind of view most people only saw on postcards or movie posters. Down below, the city roared with delivery trucks, early commuters, and horns. Up here, on the 46th floor, it was all quiet marble, curated art, and a kitchen no one cooked in. Ethan slid his smartwatch onto his wrist and checked the number he always checked first, his net worth. Up another $58 million overnight. He felt nothing. "Congratulations, man," he muttered at his own reflection in the mirror, straightening the collar of a shirt that probably cost more than some people's rent. "You're richer and still can't sleep." On the nightstand, his phone buzzed again and again. Emails from San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, board updates, analyst notes, invitations to speak at conferences about wealth optimization and strategic expansion. He ignored them and headed toward the kitchen, driven by the one thing that still felt remotely human, the smell of coffee. He didn't make it himself, of course. That was why she was there. On the other side of the city, Danny Alvarez's day started with a cracked phone screen, a blaring alarm, and the cold slap of reality. 5:02 a.m. For a full 5 seconds, she imagined turning off the alarm, rolling back under her thrift store comforter in her tiny queen studio, and pretending she didn't have to clean up after rich strangers today. Then her landlord's voice, her little sister's textbooks, and her mama's medical bill flashed through her mind like quick cuts in a movie. "Up, Danny," she told herself. "You don't get to be tired." She swung her legs out of bed, feet landing on the one soft rug she'd splurged on. The rest of the room was all function. Stacked storage bins, a wobbly table, a second-hand laptop, one little plant on the windowsill that stubbornly refused to die. She padded to the table and flipped open a cheap spiral notebook. Not for poetry. For numbers, rent due in 10 days, grocery budget, MetroCard refill, the $20 she sent every week to her mama in Miami, the $15 she was trying to save toward community college classes in business one day, the words she wrote in the margin like a promise. Her eyes lingered on the last line she'd added the night before. Emergency fund, $63.50. Danny smiled faintly. Most people would laugh at that number. To her, it felt like proof she wasn't drowning. She added today's expected pay from the coal job, subtracted what would go to bills, and closed the notebook with a small, satisfied nod. Numbers made sense. They obeyed rules. People didn't. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister, Maya, still in Florida. "Maya, morning. Danny, don't forget to eat, okay? Love you." Danny's chest tightened a little. "Danny, love you more. I'll call you tonight." She pulled on her uniform, simple black pants, a white blouse she kept painfully clean, comfortable shoes that had walked through some of the most expensive properties in New York without being noticed. Invisible. That's what she was in those penthouses. A moving shadow with cleaning supplies. Still, the coal job paid better than most. Billionaires liked their floors spotless. Ethan stepped into the kitchen and paused when he saw her. She was facing the window above the sink, back to him, her dark hair twisted into a low bun. The early light turned the steam from the coffee maker into a soft ghost hovering between them. There was a calmness in the way she moved, wiping down a spotless counter, like it might confess a secret if she was patient enough. She hummed under her breath. He didn't recognize the tune, but it was warm, like something you'd hear drifting out of a small house on a quiet street, not a multi-million-dollar penthouse in Midtown. For a moment, Ethan just watched. She wasn't the first maid he'd hired, and if he was being honest, he didn't remember the last one's name. His assistant handled all of that. Turnover was as constant as the stock market ticker. But this one actually looked him in the eye. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," Danny said, sensing his presence and turning toward him with a small, professional smile. Her voice was steady, but her hands stilled for a second on the cloth before she set it aside. "Morning," Ethan replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Coffee? It's almost ready." She nodded toward the machine. "I made it how you like it." "How I like it." He tilted his head. "And how do I like it?" "Strong." She gave the faintest hint of a grin. Like your calendar. That caught him off guard. Most staff pretended not to notice his life at all. Just keep their heads down, do their job, forget him 3 seconds after the door closed. He found himself chuckling. You've seen my calendar? It flashed on your phone yesterday when you set it down, she said, shrugging lightly. Back to back, from 7 to 7. That cup needed to be strong, smart, observant, noted. As she poured his coffee, he caught sight of the news alert on his own phone. Coal capitalized expansion into Dallas, Los Angeles, Atlanta. Ethan swiped it away. Another piece in a game he wasn't sure he wanted to keep playing, but didn't know how to quit. He took the mug from her, fingers brushing briefly. Warm skin, quick pullback. No lingering. This was a professional line, and she clearly knew where it was. Do you ever get tired of this view? Danny asked suddenly, glancing toward the sprawling skyline, then seemed to realize she might be overstepping. Sorry, that was... He surprised them both by answering honestly. Every day. Their eyes met for a beat that lasted just a little too long. Then his phone buzzed again, snapping the moment in half. An email from his wealth advisor, subject line. We should discuss diversifying your personal portfolio, Ethan. He rolled his eyes and set the phone down like it offended him. I swear, he muttered, half to himself, if one more person tries to tell me what to do with my own money. Danny went quiet, focusing on the sink, but he noticed the way her lips pressed together, like she was holding back words. He narrowed his gaze. You disagree? He asked. She froze. Excuse me? You made a face. He took a sip of coffee, studying her over the rim. You disagree. Her cheeks colored. It's not my place. You're in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, he said, leaning against the counter. I think that counts as your place to say something if you want. She hesitated, weighing something inside herself, that small, invisible ledger she kept when to speak, when to swallow. Never mind, she said at last, voice softer. It must be nice to have so much money that the biggest problem is how to manage it. There was no venom in it, just an honest observation. Somehow, that stung more. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. The elevator dinged in the hallway, a reminder that his day would soon turn into back-to-back meetings about numbers that had long ago turned into abstractions. He watched her pick up the cloth again, going back to wiping a perfectly clean counter as if she could erase the conversation. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan felt an impulse he didn't recognize. Curiosity about a person who wasn't on his payroll to impress him. Danny, right? He asked. Her eyes flicked to him, surprised he'd remembered. Yes, sir. How long have you been working here? 2 weeks. Before that? A few other places, she said carefully. Houses, offices, hotels. He nodded slowly, filing the answer away. There was more to the story. He could feel it, like a draft, slipping through a closed window. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that on the 46th floor of a glass tower, a bored billionaire and a tired maid had just crossed an invisible line. They'd noticed each other. And neither of them knew yet that a single joke he'd soon make in this kitchen would change both of their lives. Quick question for you. If you were in Danny's shoes, and your billionaire boss complained about people telling him what to do with his money, what would you say back to him? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm curious what your first reaction would be. The joke started because Ethan couldn't stand the silence. 3 hours after Danny left that morning, the penthouse had been invaded by suits, his CFO, his wealth advisor, and a corporate attorney who smiled with his teeth, but never with his eyes. They spread out at his marble dining table like it was a battlefield map, laptops open, charts glowing. We're overweight in tech, Simon, the advisor said, scrolling through a colorful graph. Given our exposure in San Francisco already, I'd like to reallocate some of your positions into more stable real estate holdings in Dallas and Atlanta. Ethan nodded mechanically, his gaze drifting. Words washed over him. Yield, hedge, risk profile, tax harvesting, they sounded like another language. One he was fluent in, but no longer cared about. What about your philanthropy arm? The attorney cut in smoothly. We can expand the Cole Foundation in Chicago and Houston, get you some favorable press, offset a portion of... Yeah, sure, Ethan said, more sharply than he meant to. Just put together options. The men exchanged quick glances. Simon cleared his throat. Ethan, with respect, he said in that careful, deferential tone wealth advisors used when they were about to say something he wouldn't like. You're delegating a lot of very important decisions. You built Cole Capital by being hands-on. I'm only suggesting we take a more active approach to Simon. Ethan looked him dead in the eye. I spend my life deciding things. If I want to be passive about my own money, that's my decision too, right? Silence. The attorney made a show of taking notes. Simon held his gaze a second longer, then looked down. Of course, by the time Ethan had signed the last document and the door clicked shut behind them, his jaw ached from clenching it. He walked back to the kitchen, loosened his tie, and exhaled hard. The skyline stared at him through the glass, glittering and indifferent. He poured himself another coffee. It tasted like the morning, over-caffeinated, undersatisfying. Footsteps sounded behind him, light, quick. He didn't need to turn to know it was her. Sorry, Danny said. Your assistant let me in. She said you requested afternoon service. I did, he muttered, then remembered the email from earlier. Right. He told Michelle to bring Danny in around 2 for light tidying, in case the meeting went late. The penthouse was already spotless. He just wanted something human in the background. Danny glanced at the table, now cleared of suits, but still bearing the faint imprint of their presence. A forgotten pen, a ring of condensation. Must have been a big meeting, she said quietly. Same as always. He took a sip. Them telling me how to grow money, I don't even have time to spend. Her eyes flicked to his hand. He realized he was gripping the mug so tightly his knuckles had gone white. She moved past him toward the sink, reaching for the dishes like it was muscle memory. Ethan watched the practiced efficiency of her hands, the way she stacked, rinsed, and wiped without thinking. Money he didn't need. Work she couldn't afford to lose. They were living opposite sides of the same coin. He set the mug down with a soft clink. Hey, Danny, he said. Yes, Mr. Cole, she replied without turning. He hesitated. The question rose in his throat, unexpected and ridiculous. If you were in charge of my money, the very idea almost made him smirk. But something about the morning conversation gnawed at him. Her notebook eyes. The way she'd said, it must be nice, not with envy but with distance. I've got 3 firms fighting to manage my portfolio, he said instead, trying to sound casual. All of them think they know what's best for me. It's entertaining. Danny let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. I bet their definition of best is very profitable. For them? He asked. For all of you, she corrected, but there was a shadow behind the words. He turned, leaning against the counter. So what? You don't trust people in suits? I don't trust anyone who gets rich off how other people sleep at night, she said, then winced. I mean, sorry, that sounded rude. No, he cut in, more intrigued than offended. Finish the sentence. She set a plate in the drying rack. Her fingers were damp, the skin at her knuckles slightly reddened from cleaning chemicals. Most people I clean for, she said slowly. They're up late, phones in their hands, yelling into Bluetooth earbuds about deals in places they've never been. Dubai, Shanghai, LA, and then they complain they can't sleep or enjoy anything, but they won't stop making more. And that's a problem because? He asked, genuinely curious. Because, she shrugged one shoulder. When is enough enough? I clean bathrooms and offices. I see all the stuff. Closets packed, pantries overflowing. Still, they're stressed. It's like, the more they have, the more scared they are of losing it. He thought of the number on his screen every morning. The number that had become a god, dictating his mood, his worth, his entire day. Fear is a good motivator, he said lightly, testing her. That's how you build an empire. And how you die without ever resting, she replied softly. The words hung in the air. For a second, the steady hum of the city through the glass seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them and the sting of truth between them. Ethan barked a short laugh, more self-defense than amusement. Tell you what, he said, pushing away from the counter. Since everybody's so eager to give me advice, how about you take a shot? She blinked. Excuse me? If you, he pointed at her playfully, were in charge of my billions, what would you do with them? Consider it an exercise. I need some comic relief. He expected her to laugh, smile, shake her head. He expected her to say, that's crazy. and go back to the dishes. Instead, Donnie froze. He saw her throat move as she swallowed. Her fingers curled slightly around the wet cloth, squeezing water out in a slow drip. "This is a joke?" she asked. "Mostly," he said, smirking. "Come on. Lighten my day." Danny's master plan for fixing the billionaire. Danny's master plan. She turned then, fully facing him. Her expression wasn't amused. It wasn't angry either. It was steady. The look of someone who had run this scenario in her head more times than she'd admit. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "First," Donnie said, "I'd save you from your own money." The words hit him like a slap he hadn't seen coming. For a heartbeat, Ethan did nothing. He just stared at her, his brain trying to file the statement under joke, but it didn't fit. There was no punchline, no teasing grin. "Save me?" he repeated. "From my money?" "Yes," she replied. "How exactly would you do that?" His tone was light, but there was an edge under it now. Danny took a breath and stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance, but no longer hiding behind countertops or chores. The steam from the sink curled around her like a thin fog. "I'd start," she said, "by asking you why a man with more money than most small countries looks like he hasn't slept in a month." He flinched internally. Outwardly, he lifted a brow. "You think I look tired?" "I think you look exhausted," she answered. "In your eyes. Not your clothes." "Maybe I just party too much," he quipped. "You don't," she said quickly, surprising him. "Your calendar flashes on your phone. Meetings, calls, flights. No parties. Not the fun kind anyway." Her attention to detail stung, because it was accurate. He covered discomfort with sarcasm, his favorite armor. "So your brilliant financial plan is, what? A nap?" A hint of a smile touched her lips, but her gaze stayed serious. "My plan," she said, "would be to figure out what you're actually afraid of, and then stop letting your money feed that fear." He laughed once, short and humorless. "What makes you think I'm afraid of anything?" "You just told 3 men in suits to decide everything so you don't have to," she said gently. People only give up that kind of control when they're tired or scared. Ethan's chest tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. "You don't know anything about me," he said, more sharply than he intended. "I know a few things." Danny's voice softened. "You check your net worth before you check the news. You work when you don't have to. You pay people to make decisions for you, so you don't have to blame yourself if something goes wrong. And you keep this place so clean, it feels like no one really lives here." He looked around, seeing his own penthouse through her eyes, the untouched kitchen, the pristine couch, the absence of personal mess. The only signs of life were his devices. "You're observant," he muttered. "I clean for a living," she said. "You learn to read the spaces people leave behind." He leaned back against the counter again, trying to regain some ground. "Okay, fine," he said. "Let's say, hypothetically, I'm this exhausted, scared, control-avoiding billionaire. What's step 2 of your master plan?" Danny hesitated, glancing toward the windows. Manhattan glowed behind her, a sea of glass and steel and grinding ambition. "Step 2, she said carefully, "would be to make you live like one of us for a little while." "One of who?" "Us," she repeated. "The people who budget, who can't buy our way out of mistakes, who know exactly how much is in our bank account because we have to." He imagined himself standing in line at a grocery store, counting cash for groceries, taking the subway, checking his account before buying something. The mental picture was so absurd, he almost snorted. "You're suggesting I—" "What?" he asked. "Give it all away?" "No." She shook her head. "I'm suggesting you stop hiding behind it. Money's a tool, Mr. Cole. If it's the only thing between you and your fear, it's not protecting you. It's trapping you." There it was, the sentence that lodged somewhere deep in his chest, stubborn and unwelcome. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand what it meant to be responsible for thousands of employees, multiple offices from New York to Los Angeles, deals in Atlanta and Houston and Chicago that could collapse if he wasn't careful. But he found himself asking something entirely different. "How do you handle money?" he asked quietly. Danny blinked, thrown by the sudden turn. "Me?" "Yes," he nodded. "You. Miss, I'd save you from your own money. What's your big secret? She hesitated, then almost laughed at herself. There is no secret. I write everything down. I give every dollar a job. Rent, food, metro, little bit for my mom's medicine, a little bit for my sister. She looked down at her hands. And I keep trying to build an emergency fund, so one bad month doesn't destroy everything. And that works? He asked. Sometimes, she said. Sometimes the car breaks down, or my mama has a bad week and the savings disappear. But at least I know where it went. It's not magic. It's just paying attention and deciding on purpose. Paying attention, deciding on purpose. Two things he'd been avoiding with his own wealth. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy, full of something neither of them had words for yet. A quiet part of him, the part that occasionally wondered what his life would look like if he'd never made his first million in San Francisco, if he'd stayed at that little startup job in Austin before the buyout, leaned toward her words like a plant toward sunlight. Another part bristled. You're telling me a notebook and some hard choices could fix what 3 global advisory firms are handling? She met his eyes, unflinching. I'm telling you, those firms profit when you stay confused. My notebook doesn't. He huffed out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, wasn't quite a sigh. Okay. Danny, he said, tapping the marble with his fingertips. You've officially given the most insulting and interesting financial advice I've heard all year. Sorry, she said automatically. Don't be, he paused. I asked. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. He picked up his phone, staring at the screen without really seeing it. The reflection showed his face, and, just beside it, her outline near the sink. 2 people separated by fortune but standing in the same kitchen, talking about fear and money like it was something you could scrub off with enough soap. Let's say I wanted to hear more of this. Notebook wisdom, he said slowly. Would you have more to say? Danny blinked, caught off guard. Maybe. I read a lot. Blogs, podcasts, library books. About money. About getting out of debt. I'm trying to make sure my mom never has to choose between medicine and food again. There was no self-pity in the statement, just a quiet, fierce determination. Something twisted in his chest again, unexpected and uncomfortable. Right, Ethan said, forcing a lighter tone. Good to know my maid understands money better than my advisors. I don't, she protested quickly. They know markets. I just know survival. He looked at her for a long moment. Sometimes, he said softly, survival is the only market that matters. She seemed about to ask him what he meant, but his phone buzzed again, flashing an incoming call from his CFO. He let it ring. Danny turned back to the sink, sensing the conversation was over. But the air between them felt different now. Charged with something new. She'd crossed a line, and he'd let her. Not only let her, invited her. And her first words had shaken him in a way no market crash ever had. He'd asked her for financial advice as a joke. He wasn't laughing anymore. If you'd ever had the chance to give blunt, honest advice to someone way richer than you, would you say it like Danny did, or hold back to stay safe? Think about it. Whose feelings would you protect first? For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan pretended nothing had happened. He took calls, signed documents, barked orders. At one point, he stood at the window talking to his team in Los Angeles about a deal, staring down at the toy-sized yellow cabs crawling along the avenues. Just lock in the acquisition, he said into his headset. I don't care if they want another 2%. We spend more than that on office coffee in Houston. They laughed. He didn't. As the call ended, his gaze drifted inevitably back to the kitchen. Danny was wiping down the already spotless stovetop, moving in tight, economical circles. Every time she turned slightly, he caught flashes of her expression, focused, serious, calm, like someone doing much more than moving a cloth over steel. He heard her words again, looping in his head. First, I'd save you from your own money. Money's a tool. If it's the only thing between you and your fear, it's not protecting you. It's trapping you. It annoyed him how much they stuck. She was a maid, a good one, sharp, yes, observant, sure. But she had no idea what it meant to carry what he carried. To know that if he miscalculated in New York, people in Dallas and Chicago might lose their jobs. That investors in Atlanta would start asking questions. That headlines in San Francisco would enjoy calling him reckless. What did she know about that? About sleepless nights where the smallest mistake could cost millions? He needed those thoughts gone, so he did what he always did when something got too close to the bone. He buried it in busyness. "Michelle," he called, stepping away from the window. His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Yes, Ethan? Move my 6 o'clock up. I want to make it to the dinner downtown." "You told them you weren't coming," Michelle replied carefully. "You said you were skipping the fundraiser this year." He remembered. He'd sworn off rubber chicken galas full of empty speeches and cameras. "Yeah, well," he said, glancing toward the kitchen again. "I changed my mind. Put me down as attending." "All right," she said after a beat. "Car at 6:30? Make it 6. If he was in a ballroom packed with donors and politicians, he wouldn't have to think about notebooks and emergency funds. Danny felt his attention before she saw it. The air in the penthouse shifted when Ethan Cole's mind turned toward you. You could feel it, even if he didn't say anything. A quiet pressure, a slight prickle at the back of your neck. She kept her eyes on the sponge, scrubbing at an invisible streak on the pristine counter. What had she done? As soon as the words had left her mouth, "Save you from your own money," she'd wanted to pull them back. It wasn't just bold, it was reckless. Maids didn't talk to billionaires like that. Not in movies, definitely not in real life. In a city where one bad recommendation could make you lose 3 other clients and your rent in the same month. But he'd asked, and she'd been so tired of swallowing thoughts, of nodding and smiling, even when people said things that made her stomach knot. Still, the anxiety sat low in her chest now, heavy and insistent. She rinsed a plate and set it aside, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm. Scrub, rinse, stack. Her mind refused to cooperate. What if he tells the agency you're unprofessional? What if he replaces you with someone who keeps their mouth shut? Her phone, tucked deep in her pocket and on silent, pressed against her thigh, like a reminder of everything she couldn't afford to lose. Rent, Mom's meds, Maya's textbooks. Danny inhaled slowly and exhaled through her nose, like one of the podcasts said to do when you felt yourself spiraling. "Stay in the numbers," she whispered to herself. "You did the math. You can't afford to panic." She'd tell him she was out of line, apologize, make it clear it wouldn't happen again. People liked apologies. It made them feel big and merciful. She finished the kitchen, checked her list, and headed toward the living room. Ethan was by the window, phone at his ear, tie loosened, voice clipped. "No, Derek. Tell them if they want us in Houston, they play by our terms. I'm not flying down there to beg." His reflection in the glass looked taller, harder, almost like 2 different men layered on top of each other. The polished billionaire and the tired stranger. He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. "Mr. Cole?" Danny said quietly. He turned. His eyes flicked over her like he was remembering who she was again. "Yeah?" "I wanted to say," her fingers twisted in the hem of the cleaning cloth, "about what I said earlier. I crossed a line. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I'm sorry." He watched her for a long second, weighing her words. Part of him liked the apology. It restored balance, pushed this uncomfortable, too personal conversation back into its proper box. Employer and employee. Safe distance. Another part of him was disappointed. "Don't apologize for answering a question I asked," he said. "That's on me." Her shoulders loosened a fraction, but she still looked uneasy. "Still," she said, "I need this job. I don't want you to think I'm disrespectful." He almost smiled. It had been a long time since anyone cared about disrespecting him. Most people just cared about impressing him. "I've been disrespected by people with private jets and Harvard degrees," he replied. "You spoke to me like a human. That's rare." Her eyes widened slightly at that, like she wasn't sure if it was a compliment. "Thank you," she said. "I'll keep my financial opinions to myself from now on." The words were like a door closing. Click. Something in him reacted on instinct. "Don't," he said, sharper than he meant. "I mean, you don't have to do that." She studied his face, unsure what he wanted from her now. "You said I made you uncomfortable," she said. "Most bosses don't like being uncomfortable." "Most bosses don't like being wrong," he corrected quietly. "Sometimes I get bored of being surrounded by people who only tell me what I want to hear." Now she really looked confused. So, you want me to keep telling you things you don't want to hear? Her bluntness almost made him laugh. Let's take it one uncomfortable comment at a time. That pulled a tiny, reluctant smile from her. It made her look younger, softer. He noticed the small scar by her left eyebrow, almost hidden by the way she parted her hair. She nodded. Okay, one at a time. The tension between them eased a little, but underneath it, resistance still simmered. She resolved to be careful, to keep her observations to herself unless asked. To remember that money creates invisible rules, even when no one says them out loud. He resolved to shrug off the impact of her words, to file her notebook wisdom under interesting but irrelevant, and to remember that he lived in a world of mergers and metrics, not notebooks and emergency funds. They were both lying to themselves a little. By early evening, the penthouse was spotless. Again, Danny gathered her supplies, slid them into her bag, and did a final sweep through the rooms. Her brain ran its usual checklist. Counters, mirrors, floors, bathroom, trash. No streaks. Everything in its place. She paused at the edge of the living room. Ethan was adjusting his cufflinks, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, his posture a bit straighter, expression smoother, like he was putting on another kind of uniform. You heading out? She asked, immediately regretting the familiarity. Fundraiser, he said, not sounding thrilled. Downtown hotel, ballrooms, speeches, name tags. My favorite. You donate a lot? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He shrugged. Depends on who's watching. There it was again, that bitter little edge she heard sometimes, the one that made her think his life wasn't as glamorous as it looked. She lifted her bag a little. I'm all finished. Do you want me to sign out with your assistant? She's already gone, he said. You're good. Same time tomorrow? If the agency keeps me on, she said lightly, then mentally cursed herself for saying it out loud. His brows drew together. I told them you're doing a good job. She blinked. You did? Yeah. He reached for his wallet, then paused. Is that surprising? I guess I'm more used to only hearing about my mistakes, she said honestly. He opened the wallet, then hesitated again, like he was having an internal debate. Finally, he pulled out a card and held it out. Here, he said. She looked down. Cole Capital. It read, his name, direct line, email. I don't, she started. It's not a bribe, he said, half teasing, half serious. Just, if you ever want to send me that budget system of yours, or whatever it is you do in that notebook, I'm curious. You could email it. Her instinctive reaction was to refuse. This was weird. Maids didn't email billionaires. But behind the weirdness was something else. Opportunity. Not for money, for voice. A chance to put into words the things she'd taught herself through trial and error. A chance, maybe, to be more than invisible. Okay, she said slowly, slipping the card into her pocket next to her cracked phone. Maybe I'll send something. Only if you want to, he added quickly, almost too quickly. No pressure. I'm used to pressure, she said lightly. That's why I budget. This time he did laugh, a real one. It changed his whole face. She turned to leave before she could overthink it. Danny? He called. She glanced back. Earlier, he said, when you talked about wanting your mom not to choose between food and medicine, is she okay? The question was so unexpected her throat tightened. She's managing, Danny said, choosing her words carefully. Diabetes, some complications. We get by. He nodded, expression sober. If you ever need time to go visit her or handle something, tell Michelle. Don't just disappear. The offer warmed her, but also made her wary. Kindness from employers sometimes came with strings. Thank you, she said. I'll remember. She left before her voice could wobble. In the elevator, descending from the 46th floor to street level, Danny leaned her head against the cool metal wall and exhaled. She'd nearly argued with a billionaire, almost talked herself out of a job. Somehow walked away with his business card and a weird invitation to email him her personal money system. No more lines, she told herself, just clean, keep it simple. But another voice in her, the stubborn one that had gotten her family through some of their hardest months, whispered something different. If someone with that much money is even a little bit open to changing, isn't that worth risking a few uncomfortable conversations? She didn't know. Not yet. On the street, New York hit her all at once. The smell of roasted nuts from a cart, the blare of horns, a woman's laugh echoing off glass, the chill breeze threading through skyscrapers. She zipped her jacket up and headed for the subway, her mind already shifting to grocery lists and how far she could stretch this week's pay. High above, in the penthouse she'd just left, Ethan watched a black town car pull up for him. He should have been thinking about donors, speeches, handshakes. Instead, his thoughts kept circling back to a spiral notebook on a wobbly table in a studio in Queens that he'd never seen. He picked up his phone, opened his email, and hovered over Simon's name. "Draft budget proposal attached for your review, Ethan. We can walk through it tomorrow," the earlier email read. He typed a reply, fingers moving almost without his permission. "Got it. Also considering some personal changes to how I handle things. Will update you." He stared at the sentence, then deleted the last part. "Got it. Let's discuss tomorrow." Send. He slipped the phone into his pocket, straightened his tie, and headed for the elevator. Resistance wasn't just about pushing someone away. Sometimes it was about pushing something down inside yourself. The difference was subtle and dangerous. Tonight, he'd shake hands, pose for photos, write a big check to a cause his PR team approved. Tomorrow, when the penthouse was quiet again, he already knew who he'd be thinking about. Not his advisors. Not his board. The maid who dared to suggest he needed saving. The fundraiser was everything Ethan expected and nothing he needed. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths. A stage with a podium flanked by banners. People in designer clothes talking about impact and change. While balancing champagne flutes, he sat at a table with other donors, listening to a speaker talk about financial literacy in underserved communities in Detroit, Atlanta, and Houston. A slideshow behind the man flashed images of kids in overcrowded classrooms, parents at kitchen tables with stacks of bills. "Too many Americans," the speaker said smoothly, "live paycheck to paycheck. They lack the tools to manage their money, to build emergency funds, to escape the cycle of fear and scarcity." The words should have sounded noble. To Ethan, they sounded eerily familiar. "I give every dollar a job. I'm trying to make sure my mom never has to choose between medicine and food again." Danny's voice overlapped the speech in his mind, more real than the slideshow. He looked around the ballroom. People nodded gravely, clapped at the right phrases, wrote checks they'd forget about by next quarter. He glanced at the giant screen again. A photo showed a woman at a small table, head in her hands, a notebook and calculator in front of her. For a split second, it looked exactly like the picture he had in his head of Danny's wobbly table in Queens. He shifted in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable in his $1,000 suit. "You all right?" the donor next to him asked. "Fine," Ethan replied. "Just thinking." "About what?" the man laughed. "The tax write-off or the dessert course?" Ethan forced a polite smile. "Something like that." By the time he got home, it was past midnight. Manhattan glowed outside, a sea of lights. The penthouse felt colder than usual. He loosened his tie, dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, and just stood there, staring at the dark kitchen. He pictured Danny standing by the sink, sleeves rolled up, talking about fear and money and making every dollar count. The contrast between her and the ballroom chatter was whiplash. On impulse, he walked to the counter, grabbed a pad of paper from the junk drawer, and sat at the kitchen island. The pen felt oddly heavy in his hand. He wrote at the top of the page, "If I had to live like Danny for 30 days." He stared at the sentence, then scoffed at himself. What was he doing? Playing pretend poverty? It sounded insulting even in his own head. But the thought wouldn't let go. Money's a tool. If it's the only thing between you and your fear, it's not protecting you. It's trapping you. He tapped the pen restlessly, then opened his laptop instead. He had all the world's information and his own company's data at his fingertips. But he typed something ridiculously simple into the search bar. How to budget on a low income. Articles flooded the screen. Blogs from single moms in Chicago, warehouse workers in Houston, gig workers in Los Angeles. People breaking down their paychecks. Every line item. Every hard choice. He read until the words blurred. Their lives looked nothing like his, and exactly like the slideshow at the gala. And like Danny's notebook, he imagined, a new idea took shape in his mind. Half experiment, half something else. If fear really was running the show, maybe the only way to face it was to strip away his usual armor and see what was left. He closed the laptop and stared up at the ceiling. "Okay, Danny," he murmured into the empty penthouse. "Show me what living on purpose looks like." The next morning, Donnie arrived with a familiar mix of sleepiness and determination in her veins. The subway had been delayed, her feet already ached. Her to-do list hummed in the back of her mind. She rang the bell, expecting the housekeeper routine. Let in, nod at the assistant, quietly disappear into the work. Instead, Ethan opened the door himself. He was barefoot, in a plain gray t-shirt and joggers, hair still slightly damp from the shower. For the first time, he looked less like a magazine cover and more like a man who actually lived here. "Morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she replied, immediately more formal than she felt. "Sorry if I'm a couple minutes later than usual. The train." "You're fine," he said quickly. "You're right on time." That alone was strange. Billionaires didn't reassure their staff about train delays. She stepped inside, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "The kitchen looks cleaner than when I left it," she joked, trying to break the weirdness. "Couldn't sleep," he said, gesturing toward the island. Her gaze followed his hand and landed on the notepad lying open on the counter. On it, in his neat, decisive handwriting, she read, "If I had to live on $2,500 a month in New York." Her stomach did a little flip. "This yours?" she asked cautiously. "Yeah." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly almost self-conscious. "I was thinking about what you said, about living like one of you for a while." She blinked. "One of us?" "People who have to pay attention," he clarified. "Who can't just throw money at a problem and make it go away." "I don't recommend trying that as a hobby," she said dryly. "It's not fun." He huffed a short laugh. "I figured. But the gala last night was about financial literacy and empowering communities and all that. And honestly, listening to them, I realized I'm not especially literate about my own life, just my net worth." She hesitated, unsure if this was a confession or a setup. "What are you saying, exactly?" she asked. "I'm saying," he took a breath, "I want to try something. An experiment. For 30 days, I want to put myself on a fixed budget and have someone who actually lives that way help me design it and hold me to it." Her eyebrows shot up. "You want me to do that?" "Who else am I going to ask?" he said. "Simon charges me 10 grand to tell me to buy more Dallas real estate. You use a notebook to stretch every dollar. I think your system's closer to what those families in Detroit and Atlanta need than anything my board dreams up." She crossed her arms unconsciously, a defensive move. "You realize this sounds a little like a social experiment for a reality show, right?" He winced. "That's not what I mean. There won't be cameras, or press, or Instagram posts about my humbling journey. This is just between us. I want to see what happens if I stop letting my money shield me from every discomfort for a month." She looked at him carefully, searching for condescension, for a joke, for anything that made this feel like mockery. All she saw was a man who looked a little scared of his own idea. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said at last. He seemed relieved she hadn't shut it down immediately. "2 things," he said. "First, help me set up a real budget, like you said, giving every dollar a job. Personal stuff, not corporate. I want to know what it's like to tell myself no, because the numbers say so, not because a PR team or advisor thinks it looks good." "And second," she prompted. "Second," he said slowly, "I want you to teach me how people like you actually make it work. Where the fear shows up, where the trade-offs hurt, what you do when emergencies hit and the numbers don't add up." She sat with that for a moment, heart thudding. There was a lot she could say. About the time the car broke down in Queens and she'd had to choose between getting it fixed or paying the full rent on time. About the nights she'd stared at her notebook, trying to figure out how to carve $20 out of a budget that was already razor thin. About praying her mom's blood sugar would behave until payday. "This isn't entertainment for you?" she asked quietly. "You're not just bored?" He shook his head. "I'm bored with being numb." "That's different." The honesty in that sentence landed harder than she expected. "I'll pay you extra for your time," he added quickly, as if suddenly realizing the power imbalance. Not just as a maid, but as, I don't know, a consultant. Whatever you'd make in those hours, working somewhere else, plus more. And if at any point this feels wrong or uncomfortable, you can walk away and keep the extra pay. No questions. Consultant. The word felt strange in her world. Her job titles usually included cleaning, housekeeping, service, not consulting. This is not how this usually works, she said, half to herself. I'm aware, he replied. If it makes you feel better, we can put it in writing. A separate agreement. I'm good with contracts. That pulled a small laugh from her despite the weirdness. I bet you are. She thought of her mom's last pharmacy receipt, of Maya's text about needing a new laptop for school in Miami because the old one kept freezing. Extra money could mean breathing room. But more than that, something deeper stirred. The idea that what she'd taught herself in the quiet of her apartment might actually matter to someone who lived above the clouds. All right, she said finally. I'll help, but only if this is real. No half trying and then going back to buying a new watch because you had a bad day. He lifted his hands in surrender. Deal. I'll be a good student. She gave him a look. Nobody's that good. He smiled. You haven't seen my quarterly reports. Quarterly reports don't care if you stress-eat pizza after a long day and blow your food budget, she countered. He blinked. Wait, the budget has to account for stress eating? Welcome to real life, Mr. Cole, she said. Yes. There it was again, that small, almost electric feeling between them when their worlds collided and, instead of repelling each other, somehow clicked. So, where do we start? He asked. She pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, then thought better of it, and set her bag on one of the stools. Do you have a notebook? She asked. He gestured to the pad on the counter. This work? She shook her head. No. Like a small one. Something you can carry. You need to start writing down everything you spend. As you spend it. Cash. Card. Whatever. No cheating. He opened a drawer and rummaged until he found a slim black notebook, still wrapped in plastic, some corporate swag gift, probably. He handed it to her. She unwrapped it, flipped it open, and wrote in neat, block letters on the first page. Cole, 30-day life budget. She slid it back to him. From now until this date, she circled a day a month out. This is your new best friend. No offense to you, he said, but I've had more exciting best friends. This one might save your life, she replied, or at least your sanity. He sobered at that. They moved to the island, standing side by side now, heads bent over the pad, as she asked questions. How much do you usually spend on food in a week? How often do you order delivery? Subscriptions? Streaming? Apps? Gym memberships? Impulse buys? He answered honestly at first, then caught himself trying to downplay certain things. She noticed. Don't pretend to be cheaper than you are, she chided. The numbers don't care about your ego. He snorted. That should be on a poster in our finance department. For the next hour, they stood shoulder to shoulder in the bright kitchen, breaking his life into categories and lines. It was the strangest kind of intimacy, no touching, no flirting, just the stripping down of how he moved through the world. At one point, he said, I don't even know how much my groceries cost, to be honest. People do that for me. She made a small note. We're changing that. He glanced at her. We? You'll go to the store, she said. I'll help you make the list. But you're going to see the prices yourself. Not just for you, but for the people you employ. You want to understand fear? Start in the cereal aisle. He looked almost amused. You're telling a billionaire to go to Trader Joe's. Whole Foods if you're feeling brave, she said deadpan. He laughed again, but there was respect there now, growing stronger with each answer he gave her. Forced proximity wasn't just about being in the same room. It was about being forced to look at yourself through someone else's eyes. And right now, he was seeing his habits under the harsh, honest lighting of her world. She finished the initial list, closed the pad, and checked the time. I should start my actual job before your place stops looking like it's been cleaned, she said. He nodded. Right. Of course. But tonight, she added, surprising herself, if you want to message me your expenses for the day, I can help you categorize them, so you don't get behind. He lifted the notebook slightly. Consulting hours? She smirked. Yes. And don't be shocked when you see how often you just grab a coffee. He looked over at his high-end machine. Is that a problem? Your caffeine isn't, she said. Your autopilot is. As she walked toward the cleaning closet, he found himself already thinking about the day ahead differently. Not in calendar blocks and profit margins, but in small decisions. Coffee, car, lunch, yes, no, later. The experiment had started. In a strange way, 2 contracts had been written that morning, one on paper, another with their eyes. He promised to take this seriously. She promised to tell him the truth. They didn't realize yet how much those promises would cost them, or how close they'd bring their worlds. Imagine someone like Ethan asking you to guide them through a real-life month on a tight budget. Would you take the job and be brutally honest, or protect yourself and keep some truths back? Tell me how you would handle that in the comments. The first crack in Ethan's armor didn't happen in a boardroom or over a spreadsheet. It happened in the cereal aisle at a grocery store in Brooklyn. 3 days into the budget experiment, Ethan was already annoyed by how many times he'd had to pull out the little black notebook. Coffee, car service, a mindless app purchase he'd almost made before catching himself. He'd texted the amounts to Danny each night. She'd send back comments like, "You don't need 2 delivery orders in one day. That's not hunger, that's habit. Why pay for car service from Midtown to Soho? The subway is faster at that time. You spent $26 on snacks. Are you feeding a small army?" He'd argue with her texts, then, annoyingly, admit she was mostly right. Today, she'd insisted he go to the store himself. "If you're going to understand the people on your foundation's brochures," she'd said, tying back her hair as she wiped down his counter, "you need to know what it feels like to stand there with a basket and do math over pasta sauce." He'd made a face. "Do people actually do that?" "Yes," she'd replied. "And sometimes, they put things back." So now here he was, a billionaire pushing a cart past pyramid displays of oranges and towers of canned soup, with a handwritten list in Danny's neat block letters. Eggs, milk, bread, rice, chicken, vegetables, fruit, coffee, basic cleaning supplies. Stick to the list. His first instinct was to buy the brands he'd always seen in his fridge. Organic this, imported that. Then he checked the notebook, seeing the food category Danny had circled. $200 a week, she'd said, for everything. Groceries, snacks, coffee outside. You go over, something else has to give. He stared at the numbers a second too long, then grabbed a store-brand carton of eggs instead of the fancy free-range ones. He didn't like how that felt. As he debated between 2 types of pasta sauce, a voice behind him said, "You're doing it wrong." He turned, ready to bristle, then relaxed when he saw her. Danny stood there in simple jeans and a faded navy t-shirt, hair in a low ponytail, reusable bag folded under her arm. She looked smaller, without the structure of his penthouse around her, and more herself. "You followed me?" he asked, half joking, half startled. "You texted me a picture of a $10 loaf of bread," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I didn't trust you not to buy it." He winced. "It was multigrain." "It was robbery," she shot back. "Come on." She took the basket from his hand and scanned his cart. Brand name cereal, organic almond butter, sparkling water that costs more than juice. She shook her head. "You're shopping like you still have no limits." "I do have limits," he protested, gesturing vaguely toward the notebook in his pocket. "Your limits. Then respect them," she said. "This isn't about seeing how much you can squeeze in. It's about deciding what actually matters." He watched her move down the aisle, picking up items, checking prices per ounce, putting one back, choosing another. It was surgical, precise. "How do you know all this?" he asked, following her. "Years of practice," she said. "And mistakes. And overdraft fees." That last part hung there between them. He remembered one of the blogs he'd read late the first night, someone writing about the shame of that little red negative sign in their banking app. He'd never seen that in his life. What was the worst one? He heard himself ask. She paused in front of the rice. "Worst what?" she said. "Mistake," he replied. "Money-wise." She let out a breath, eyes fixed on the shelves. "Not a single purchase," she said slowly. "It was pretending things were fine when they weren't. Putting groceries on a credit card I knew I couldn't pay off. Ignoring bills until the late fees hit. telling my mom not to worry when I was in full panic. He watched her jaw tighten as she spoke, the way her fingers drummed lightly on the cart handle. "How bad did it get?" he asked gently. She picked up a bag of rice, weighed it in her hand, then put it in the cart before she answered. "Bad enough that I almost got us evicted in Miami," she said. "We were 3 days away from the deadline, notices on the door and everything." He went quiet. "What happened?" he asked softly. "I got lucky," she said. "Picked up extra shifts, sold half my furniture, a friend loaned me money. But at night, when my mom was asleep, I would sit at the kitchen table with this stupid beat-up calculator and realize I had no idea what I was doing. I was working 3 jobs and still drowning because I didn't know how to tell myself no." She looked at him finally. "That's when I started reading blogs, library books, anything about budgeting. I started writing it all down, every dollar. I stopped pretending I was okay and started acting like someone whose choices mattered." He saw it then, the invisible line in her life, drawn right at that kitchen table. Before, chaos and denial. After, notebooks, systems, fierce discipline. "What about your dad?" he asked quietly. "Was he around?" She swallowed once. "He used to be," she said. "Until I was 12. Then he left. Left debt, too." We found out about that when people started calling the house, asking for money we didn't have. The brightness of the grocery store suddenly felt harsh. The hum of refrigerators, the murmur of other shoppers, the beep of distant scanners, it all seemed to fade as her words filled the space. "After that," she continued, "I watched my mom work herself sick trying to keep up. Double shifts, side jobs. She'd fall asleep at the table, receipts stuck to her arm. I told myself when I was old enough, I'd make sure that never happened again. That's why I care about this stuff. It's not about loving numbers, it's about hating that feeling." He thought of his own childhood, unspooling like an old tape in his mind. A cramped apartment in Newark, his father coming home late from the factory, hands stained with grease. His mother at the small table, envelopes spread out like a losing poker hand. Arguments whispered too loudly. The word foreclosure spelled out on a letter he wasn't supposed to read. "You're not the only one with eviction notices in their memory," he heard himself say. She looked at him, surprised. "You?" she asked. He nodded, reaching for a jar without looking at the label. "We lost our house when I was 14, he said. "Dad got hurt at work. The company cut his hours. Then the layoff came. Mom kept saying, 'It's just a phase, Ethan. Things will pick back up.' But the red notices kept coming. I used to lie awake listening to them argue, thinking if I just made enough money one day, no one would ever talk to each other like that again." He picked up the jar, realized it was the more expensive sauce, and put it back. Chose the cheaper one. "That's why you chase it so hard," she said quietly. "Money. Chase it," he repeated, the word catching. "I built everything so nobody could ever threaten us like that again. So my parents could breathe. So I could breathe." "Did it work?" she asked gently. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Depends. They got a nice condo in Tampa now. No foreclosure notices. But me? I traded one kind of fear for another." "You're still scared," she said. Not unkindly. Just of different things. He wanted to argue, but it was pointless. She'd already seen through him. "I'm scared of going backwards," he admitted. "Of people finding out I don't actually know how to enjoy any of this. Of slowing down and realizing I don't recognize myself without a deal on the table." There it was. The thing even he didn't say out loud very often. Danny's expression softened. "No wonder you let other people make decisions for you. If it goes wrong, it's their fault. Not the kid from Newark who promised never to be broke again." He swallowed. The grocery store, suddenly feeling like a confessional. They moved slowly down the aisle, putting items in the cart with more intention now. Each box and bag felt less like a purchase and more like a question. "What are you really afraid of? Who did you promise to protect?" By the time they reached the checkout, the cart wasn't overflowing. It was enough. Basics. A few small comforts. No impulsive luxuries. At the register, as the cashier rang up their items, Ethan watched the numbers climb on the screen. For the first time, he felt a tiny, irrational flicker of worry. What if it goes over the amount we planned? It didn't. They landed just under what Danny had allocated for the week. "See," she said as he tapped his card. "Not so bad." He exhaled. a little surprised at the relief in his chest. As they bagged the groceries, the conversation shifted, softer now. He asked her more about her mom's health. She told him about the day they moved from Miami to New York, chasing better hospital care and more jobs. "You left everything?" he asked. "We didn't have much to leave," she said, "except memories. Some of those were better left behind." "And your dad?" he asked. "Haven't heard from him in years," she said. "Sometimes I wonder if I'd recognize his voice. Then, I think, I don't need to." There was no bitterness in it, just a tired acceptance. He told her about his father, too. About the man's pride. His silence after the layoff. The way he refused help until Ethan's first big payout hit. And he could finally say, "Dad, let me." "Did he take it?" she asked. "Eventually," Ethan said. "But it changed something. I became the parent. The safety net. The bank." He made a face at the word. Back at the penthouse, as they unpacked groceries together in the gleaming kitchen, it felt like they were putting more than food on shelves. They were unpacking ghosts, laying them out under the bright, expensive lights. He held a carton of eggs, turning it over in his hands. "You know what's funny?" he said. "What?" she asked, sliding rice into a cabinet. "I've written checks bigger than what's in your entire yearly budget without thinking twice," he said. "But that moment at the register, watching the total add up, hoping it wouldn't go over, that felt more real than any deal I've closed in Chicago or San Francisco." She closed the cabinet gently. "Fear feels real," she said. "But so does relief when the math works. That's what I chase." He met her eyes. "I think," he said slowly, "that's what I've been missing. Not more zeros, just that feeling you get when you know you're okay, on purpose." Their gazes held for a heartbeat longer than usual. In that quiet, something shifted again. Not just between them, but inside them. He wasn't just a bored billionaire anymore. She wasn't just a careful maid with a notebook. They were two kids from scared households, grown into adults, trying different ways to silence the same old panic. And for the first time, they weren't doing it alone. The first week of the experiment, Ethan complained constantly. The second week, he started sending Danny photos. At first, they were purely practical. "Ethan, grocery haul. Did I do okay?" Picture of bags on his counter. Store brand pasta, chicken, vegetables, one suspiciously fancy-looking cheese. "Mostly good, the cheese is ridiculous." "Ethan, it spoke to me." "Danny, put it back next time, you're not a hostage." Then the photos shifted. A picture of his parents sitting on the couch in Tampa, his dad watching a game, his mom knitting. "Ethan, they came up for the weekend. I made them dinner instead of taking them to a restaurant. First time ever." "Danny, how'd it go?" "Ethan, no one died. They said the chicken was better than the hotel. That's mom speak for, I'm proud of you." Danny smiled at that text on the subway, her own grocery bags at her feet. She started sending things too. A photo of her mom in their tiny queen's kitchen, laughing at something off camera, flour on her hands. "Danny, I told her I'm teaching a rich man how to budget." She said, "Tell him his money is not his god. So, consider yourself warned." "Ethan, your mom is terrifying. I like her already." It was subtle, but the line between maid and consultant blurred further every day. 2 weeks in, one evening, he texted, "Ethan, I just walked past a watch I would have bought a month ago without thinking. I kept walking." "Danny, how do you feel?" Ethan, weirdly powerful. "Danny, that's what deciding on purpose feels like." He stared at that message longer than he'd admit. Deciding on purpose. The phrase echoed louder than any investor call. On a rainy Saturday, Danny's world and Ethan's finally met on her turf. She hadn't planned on inviting him. It just sort of happened. He texted mid-morning, "Ethan, my advisor wants to fly me to San Francisco for a can't-miss opportunity." I told him I'm busy. "Busy with what?" "Ethan, learning fear in the cereal aisle, apparently. You already graduated cereal. Today you get a bonus lesson. Real kitchens don't match the catalog." He sent a question mark. Before she thought it through, she added, "Danny, I'm batch cooking for the week. If you really want to see how people like me live, this is it. But it's Queens, not a penthouse." There was a long pause. She almost put her phone away. "Ethan, address?" Her heart did a strange double beat. She typed it out with shaky fingers, then immediately told herself she was insane. You just invited your billionaire boss to your studio. Too late now. He showed up an hour later, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a plain black hoodie. No entourage, no town car. He'd taken the subway, he said, like it was a science experiment. On the train, people had nudged him a bit. A man had dozed onto his shoulder. A kid had stared at him, sticky lollipop in hand. No one had recognized him. It felt oddly freeing. Now he stood in the narrow hallway outside her door, holding a brown paper bag of vegetables like an awkward guest at a family dinner. Danny opened the door and froze for half a second. He looked normal. Tall, yes. Confident, yes. But without the armor of suits and glass and polished surfaces, he was just a man in a slightly damp hoodie. Hi, he said, suddenly unsure of the rules. I brought carrots? Is that a thing people bring? She laughed, stepping aside. Get in here before my neighbor sees and thinks I started leasing rooms to superheroes. He stepped inside and stopped. Her entire studio could fit into his living room. A small bed pushed against the wall. A wobbly table with two mismatched chairs. Shelves with carefully folded clothes. A little plant on the windowsill, still hanging on. It didn't feel poor. It felt intentional. Every object had a job. Nothing extra. Nothing for show. His gaze landed on the spiral notebook on the table, open to a page full of numbers, categories, and tiny notes in the margins. Is that it? He asked softly. My brain, she said, closing the door. Or at least the part of it that isn't worrying. He moved closer, looking at the page. Rent, utilities, food, transport, mom's meds, savings. Little check marks next to certain lines. A few crossed out things, new shoes, weekend trip, with later, scribbled beside them. He touched the edge of the notebook like it was something sacred. How do you not go crazy doing this? He asked. I did go crazy when I wasn't, she said. This makes the crazy quieter. The smell of sautéing onions drifted from the tiny stove. A pot simmered, something tomato-based and comforting. You're really cooking all that on that? He asked, nodding at the two-burner stove. It's not a museum piece, she said. It works. You don't need 6 burners and marble counters to feed people. He thought of his silent, gleaming kitchen with its always clean surfaces. You might have to come yell at my appliances, he said. They're very smug. She smiled, moving to stir the pot. You can chop those carrots and try not to cut your fingers off. Real life doesn't come with an on-site medical team. He rolled up his sleeves, washed his hands at the sink, and took the knife she handed him. She guided his grip, their fingers brushing for the briefest second. Warmth zipped up his arm like he'd touched a live wire. Like this, she said, adjusting his hand. Tuck your fingers in. The carrots are not your enemy. He swallowed, suddenly aware of how close they were in the small space. The kitchen in his penthouse had never felt this intimate. As they cooked, they talked. Not in the careful, measured way of employer and employee, but like two people who'd spent enough time near each other's fears to loosen up around everything else. He told her about his first trip to Houston after his company expanded there, how he'd stayed in a fancy hotel while the guys installing his servers went home to cramped apartments, how he'd felt guilty and then drowned the feeling in room service and late-night emails. You carry a lot of people, she said, scooping rice into containers. That's heavy. You carry your family, he countered, on less than some people spend on their pet's wardrobe. She snorted. Don't talk to me about dog strollers. They both laughed, the sound filling the tiny studio in a way that made it feel bigger. While the food simmered, they sat at the wobbly table. He asked her about her dreams. And for once, she didn't shrug them off. She hesitated, picking at a small nick in the wood. I want to go back to school. Study finance or accounting. Not the Wall Street kind. The survival kind. I want to help people like my mom not get crushed by fine print and bad decisions. You'd be good at that, he said. You don't know that, she replied. I've seen your notebook, he said. I've felt it, actually, in my life. That's more than most advisors can say. Her cheeks warmed. And you? She asked. What's your dream? And don't say, grow the company. He looked at his hands, surprisingly stumped. For a long time, he said slowly, the dream was simple. Never be the kid listening to his parents argue over bills again. After I hit that, everything got fuzzy. It all turned into more deals, more cities, more numbers. He looked around her apartment, at the clean lines of a life lived close to the margins, but firmly on purpose. Lately, he admitted, I've been thinking. I want to know what it feels like to be proud of how I live, not just what I own. To not be scared of losing it all, because I finally know who I am without it. She nodded, eyes softening. That's not a billionaire dream, she said. That's a human one. Their gazes held. The air between them shifted, the steam rising from the food blurring the space like a temporary veil. He cleared his throat, breaking the spell. So, how'd I do with the carrots? She laughed, grateful for the escape valve. They're slightly uneven, but we won't fire you this time. They packed the food into containers. She labeled some with Mom and others with days of the week. He noticed she didn't label any with her own name. You didn't put your name on any, he said. She knows which ones I'll eat, Danny said. And if there's extra, Maya will take it back to campus when she visits from Miami. He hesitated. I could, help with that. Tuition. Her laptop. Whatever. She went very still. There it was, the moment she'd always dreaded. The offer that turned her from collaborator back into charity. I appreciate that, she said carefully. I do. But what we're doing, it only works if I'm not a project to fix. He flinched. That's not how I meant it. I know, she said, voice gentle. But you're used to writing checks to solve problems. I'm used to being on the side of the check that comes with strings. I need to know I'm here because of my mind, not my struggles. He sat back, absorbing that. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize for being generous, she said. I just need you to understand why it scares me. I do, he said. Or I'm trying to. Teach me how to help without owning the solution. She smiled then, a small, sad, beautiful curve. That's advanced budgeting, she said. We'll get there. They ate together, talking about lighter things for a while. Movies they loved, weird clients she'd had, trips he'd taken for work that had blurred together. At one point, a loud crash sounded next door, followed by a neighbor's annoyed shout. Ethan jumped. Danny barely reacted. Saturday tradition, she said. Upstairs guy drops something every week at this time. I think he's wrestling with his laundry basket. You live with this noise all the time? Ethan asked, looking at the ceiling. What, you can't hear the city from your glass box? She teased. He smiled, then grew thoughtful. Sometimes I think I can't hear anything up there, he said. Everything's insulated. Sound, problems, people. She studied him. You could change that, she said. I'm working on it, he replied. Their knees brushed under the table. Neither of them moved away immediately. He realized, with a jolt, that he didn't want this afternoon to end. This small, imperfect room felt more real than his entire floor of curated luxury. She felt it too, the quiet contentment, the strange safety. It scared her a little. Safety had always been temporary in her life. She didn't trust it to stay. When he finally stood to leave, the sky outside had shifted from gray to a muted, rainy blue. He paused at the door. Thank you, he said. For the food? She asked. For the food. For the notebook. For letting me see this. He gestured around the studio. Your real life. She swallowed, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. Her chipped mug, her one nice pair of shoes by the door, the photo of her and Maya taped to the wall. I'm not a foundation brochure, she said quietly. Don't turn this into one. I won't, he promised. I don't want to fix you, Danny. He stopped himself just in time. He didn't know how to finish that sentence yet. She looked at him, wide-eyed, like she'd heard the word hanging unsaid. Text me your expenses, she said, breaking the moment before it swallowed her. Even the embarrassing ones. I have a lot of those, he said lightly. That's okay, she replied. We'll write them down. Every number, remember? He nodded, then stepped into the hallway. On the train back to Manhattan, pressed between commuters, holding on to the overhead bar, Ethan found himself smiling at nothing. He opened his little black notebook and, on an empty page, wrote, Today's biggest gain, One kitchen table in Queens. He stared at the sentence, then added, almost without thinking, and someone I'm starting to care about more than I should. He closed the notebook quickly, as if someone might read it. Back in her studio, Danny washed the dishes, replaying the afternoon in her mind. His laughter, his stories, the way he'd looked around her apartment like it was something valuable, not something to escape. She dried her hands and opened her own notebook. In the margin, next to long-term goals, she wrote, "Maybe I'm allowed to want more than survival." Then she immediately felt ridiculous and scribbled a small line through it. Not gone, just lighter. Neither of them said the word yet. Not to themselves, not to each other. But something had changed. It wasn't just a budgeting experiment anymore. It was two lives, gently, dangerously, beginning to intertwine. The blow-up didn't come from shouting. It came from silence, the kind that falls after a line has been crossed and there's no way to pretend it didn't happen. It started with good intentions, like a lot of mistakes do. 3 weeks into the experiment, Ethan felt different, lighter in some places, raw in others. He still had meetings, still signed deals, but now, every choice seemed to carry a second question in the background. Is this me deciding, or my fear? He'd cut back on stupid spending, talked to his parents in Tampa about their will instead of just throwing money at them. Started sketching an idea for a real financial literacy initiative, one that didn't just look good in Detroit and Atlanta brochures, but actually helped. All of it traced back to Danny. So when he overheard her on the phone in his hallway one afternoon, hunched over her screen, voice tight, it felt personal. "No, we can't skip it," she was saying in Spanish, pacing near the coat closet. "Mama, you have to get your insulin. We'll figure it out with the rent. We always do." He stopped just out of sight, guilt prickling at the edges of his eavesdropping. A pause. "I know you're tired," she continued, softer now. "But if you end up in the hospital again, the bill will be worse than the medication. Please, let me handle this." The call ended. She pressed the phone to her forehead for a moment, shoulders sagging. Then she straightened, took a breath, and turned toward the kitchen like she was just going back to work. He stepped forward. "Everything okay?" he asked. She flinched. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were there." She forced a small smile. "Just family stuff." "The kind that's fine?" he asked quietly. "Or the kind that's, we'll figure it out somehow?" She looked away. "A little of both." He hesitated. "Is it your mom's medicine again?" Her eyes flicked to his. "It's nothing you need to worry about. We'll juggle things. I might pick up an extra cleaning shift this weekend." He recognized the lie, or maybe it was more like a reflexive deflection. "Donnie," he said, "you don't have to juggle alone." She stiffened slightly. "We've talked about this." "Have we?" he countered. "Because every week, you help me untangle decades of bad habits. You've changed how I think about money. And I'm supposed to watch you panic over rent and insulin and do nothing?" "You're not doing nothing," she said. "You're paying me, fairly, on time. That's more than some people." "It's not enough," he said, frustration flaring. "I could fix this for you in 5 minutes. A call to the foundation. A wire. One check, and your mom never has to choose between food and medicine again." Something in her face closed. "There it is," she said softly. "The check." He exhaled. "It's not an insult. It's what I know how to do. Money is the one thing I can make appear. I can't fix her health. I can't change the past, but I can get that bill off your back." "And then what?" she asked, eyes shining now, not with gratitude, but something brittle. "Every time something goes wrong in my life, I come here and you fix it? Do I send you the exact number, or do we round up to the nearest 1,000 for convenience?" He flinched. "That's not fair." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Do you know what it feels like?" she asked. "To sit at a kitchen table and finally feel like your choices matter. Only to have someone swoop in and say, 'It's okay. None of your decisions count. I can erase it all?'" "I'm not erasing you," he said, hurt surfacing now. "I'm trying to help." "I asked you not to make me a project," she said. "Remember?" He remembered. The look on her face in Queens when he'd offered to pay for Maya's laptop. The way she'd said, "I need you to know I'm here because of my mind, not my struggles." "This isn't about a project," he insisted. It's about someone I care about being in pain when I don't have to stand by and watch." The words hung there, heavier than either of them expected. Her expression flickered something soft, something frightened, then hardened again. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "Which is why I've been honest with you, why I've told you things no one else on your payroll would dare say. But if you start writing checks for my life, it changes everything." "Maybe it changes things in a good way," he said desperately. "You don't have to prove how strong you are by suffering. And you don't have to prove how good you are by saving people," she shot back. That one landed. He stared at her, stunned. "You think this is about ego? I think a part of you doesn't know who you are if you're not the one fixing things with money," she said, voice breaking just a little. "Even now, when you're trying so hard to live differently, you still reach for the same tool." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "I'm not your father," he said at last, more wounded than he meant to sound. "I'm not the man who walked away from your bills." "I know that," she whispered. "Then why does it feel like you're punishing me for wanting to be the opposite of him?" he demanded. "Because if I let you pay, I don't know where I end and you begin." She couldn't say that out loud, the words lodged in her throat. Instead she said, "Because if you do this, our whole, whatever this is, stops being about mutual respect. It becomes gratitude, and gratitude is not the same as love." The word hung there, trembling. "Who said anything about love?" he asked. But it came out too fast, too defensive. Her eyes filled. "Exactly." Silence. From somewhere in the distance, the city horns bled through the glass. The hum of Manhattan life went on, oblivious. He finally said, quieter, "So what? I do nothing? I just watch you drown and congratulate myself on respecting your independence." "I'm not drowning," she said. "I'm swimming in deep water, yes, but I've learned how. That's what I've been trying to teach you, how to live without being ruled by fear. If you step in and make my fear disappear with a check, you prove my system only works until a rich man shows up." He turned away, jaw clenched. "This isn't fair," he muttered. "You get to rewrite my every instinct as oppression. And you get to rewrite my boundaries as ingratitude," she replied, pain sharpening her tone. He faced her again, something beaten and angry in his eyes. "You know what?" he said. "Maybe we rushed this. Maybe I was stupid to think this experiment could stay clean. Lines get blurry when money and feelings mix." Her heart stumbled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he forced the words out, "maybe we should end the consulting thing. Keep it simple. You come, you clean, you go. No more notebooks, no more grocery trips, no more queens." The last word came out like it hurt him. She stared at him, throat tight. "So that's your solution," she said. "When it gets uncomfortable, when you can't buy your way into being the hero, you cut the connection." "You're the one who said gratitude isn't love," he snapped. "Maybe you're right. Maybe whatever this is, it's one big imbalance." Her eyes burned. "I asked for honesty. I didn't ask for you to walk away the first time I said no. And I didn't ask to care this much about what happens to you," he said, voice raw. "But I do. And apparently, that's the problem." There it was. The break. He looked at her a long moment, like he was waiting for her to change her mind. To say, "Fine, help, pay the bill." She didn't. She lifted her chin instead, though her hands were shaking. "If you want to end it, Mr. Cole," she said formally, the Mr. landing like a slammed door, "consider this my last week as your consultant." His jaw tightened at the title. "As you wish," he said, mask snapping back into place. "Michelle will handle the schedule." She nodded once, eyes glossy but dry. "Thank you," she said, "for the work, and for listening as long as you did." She turned to leave the room. He didn't stop her. When the elevator doors closed on her, the penthouse felt bigger than ever, and emptier. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands, the silence roaring in his ears. He'd spent his life buying his way out of fear. For the first time, the thing he wanted most couldn't be bought. And he had no idea how to fix something that could only be healed by two people deciding, on purpose, to reach for each other instead of their old defenses. The week after Danny walked out, Ethan found out what silence really sounded like. It wasn't just the lack of conversation in the kitchen. It was the absence of those nightly texts. "You spent how much on coffee? Remember, numbers don't care about your ego. Write it down, Mr. Cole, all of it." His phone stayed stubbornly quiet. Michelle noticed first. You okay? She asked one morning, standing in his office overlooking Midtown Manhattan. You've rescheduled half your meetings. I'm fine, he said automatically. She folded her arms. You're staring at an empty chair like it insulted your mother. That doesn't scream fine. The empty chair across from his desk had once held Danny's notebook and her skeptical expression. Now it just held air. He sighed, rubbing his temples. You ever say something trying to help and realize you might have just blown everything up? All the time, Michelle said. It's called having a husband. He cracked a tiny smile. It faded quickly. I tried to help her, he said quietly. With her mom, with money, and she acted like I'd betrayed what we were doing. Did you listen to what she actually asked for? Michelle asked. Or what you thought she meant? He frowned. She said she didn't want to be a project. And then you offered to fix everything with a check? Michelle guessed. He looked at her. You knew? I didn't need details, she said. I've watched you do it for years, Ethan. See a problem, throw money at it, move on. Works for buildings in Houston and contracts in Chicago. Doesn't work so great on people, especially proud ones. She's not proud, he said. She's protective of her independence. Michelle raised an eyebrow. And you're not? He had no answer. She softened. You brought her into your world because she understood something you didn't. You can't suddenly switch the roles without asking if she wants that. He stared out at the skyline, the city sprawling in all directions. What am I supposed to do? He asked. Watch her struggle when I could make it stop? Maybe, Michelle said slowly, you figure out a way to help that doesn't erase her story or her choices. How? He asked. Draw me a diagram. She smiled sadly. That's the part you have to figure out. It's not a deal to structure. It's a person to understand. Across the river in Queens, Donnie was also learning what absence weighed like. She still went to other cleaning jobs, still wrote in her notebook, still listened to her mom's soft breathing in the next room at night. But the little black rectangle on her table, Ethan's business card, sat there like a stone. Mama noticed. Mi amor, she said one evening, stirring a pot of beans, her hands steady despite the slight tremor in her fingers. You're looking at that card like you want to throw it or eat it. Danny huffed a laugh. Neither sounds good. Her mom wiped her hands on a dish towel and leaned against the counter. You told me about this man, she said. The rich one who asked you to teach him how to count his own blessings. That's not exactly how he put it, Danny said, smiling despite herself. You said he listened, her mom continued, that he changed things, that he wants to do good. He does, Danny admitted. He just doesn't know how to stop paying for it. And you got mad when he tried to help you? Mama asked, not unkindly. Danny bristled. It's not that simple. Nothing is, her mom said. That's why God gave us hearts and not calculators. Danny sank into a chair. If I let him pay our bills, what does that make me? Or you? Another story he gets to tell about how generous he is. Her mom's eyes softened. You think so little of yourself that you can't imagine someone helping you because they love you, not because they want a trophy? The word landed like a dropped plate. Love? Danny said quickly. He's not. Her mom smiled, that knowing, infuriating mother smile. You talk about him like a person, not like a paycheck. You get quiet when you say his name. That's not just a client, Daniela. Danny stared at the table, tracing a groove with her finger. I told him gratitude isn't love, she said. I didn't want things to get confused. And you're right, her mom said. But love includes gratitude sometimes. It also includes letting people in where it hurts. It feels like losing control, Danny whispered. Mama sat across from her, taking her hand. Hijita, she said softly, you have spent your whole life trying to control what money does to you, to us. I'm proud of you for that. But you can't control love the same way. You can say yes or no, stay or go, open or close. That's your power. But you can't make it safe in the same way you made the budget safe. Danny blinked back tears. What if he changes his mind? She asked. What if one day helping me doesn't feel good anymore, and he disappears like Papa did? Then we survive, her mom said. We've survived worse, but if you never let yourself be loved because you're afraid of being left, you let your father's ghost decide your future. And he doesn't deserve that power. Danny swallowed hard. Love. The word felt too big, too dangerous. But so did the thought of never seeing Ethan again. Never arguing over pasta sauce in Brooklyn. Never hearing him laugh in her tiny kitchen. Maybe I hurt him, she admitted. He looked lost when I walked out. Then you have to decide, her mom said gently. Which hurts more, your pride or losing him? The question settled over her like a heavy blanket. That night, after her mom was asleep, Danny opened her notebook. On a fresh page, she wrote 2 columns. Stay safe alone. Risk everything with him. Under the first, she scribbled, Control. No expectations. Just me and the numbers. Under the second, No control. Possibility. Real partnership. Real pain if it goes wrong. She stared at the page until the words blurred. Finally, she circled the second column, heart pounding. 2 days later, Ethan stood in a conference room in Lower Manhattan, staring at a whiteboard covered in diagrams. Detroit, Atlanta, Houston, his foundation director was saying, tapping different sections. We can pilot the community programs there. Seminars, workshops, partnerships with local banks. Who's designing the curriculum? Ethan interrupted. The director paused. We have a few consultants lined up. People with experience in wealth management. And, have they ever had an overdraft fee? Ethan asked. She blinked. I doubt it. He capped the marker, the squeak echoing in the quiet room. We're not doing this, he said, without someone in the room who actually knows what it feels like to be one decision away from disaster. We don't need more white papers. We need Danny's notebook, scaled. Danny? The director repeated. Never mind, he said quickly. Just find me someone who has lived what we're trying to fix. And pay them like their perspective matters. He left the meeting abruptly, heart racing. He knew what he had to do. For once, the answer wasn't in a wire transfer. It was in words he was terrified to say. That evening, he stood outside a familiar door in Queens, heart pounding harder than it had before any board presentation in San Francisco or Chicago. The hallway smelled like someone's cooking and someone else's laundry detergent. Voices murmured behind other doors. His suit felt out of place here, too sharp against the scuffed paint and worn carpet. He raised his hand and knocked. For a moment, he considered bolting down the stairs, back to his world of glass and steel and controllable chaos. Then, the door opened. Danny stood there, surprise flickering across her face, quickly chased by something else, hope, fear, maybe both. He tried to speak, nothing came out. Hi, she said softly. Hi, he managed. I didn't text because I wasn't sure if you'd answer. She stepped back slightly. Do you want to come in? Only if I'm not crossing a line, he said. She held his gaze. We already crossed all the lines, Ethan. Come in and say what you came to say. He stepped inside, the studio both exactly as he remembered and completely different now that he wasn't sure he was welcome here. The notebook still sat on the table. That felt like a good sign. He took a breath. I'm sorry, he said. The words were small and enormous at the same time. I thought I could fix things the only way I've ever known, he continued. Throw money at the problem. Make it disappear. I didn't listen to what you were really saying. That you wanted partnership, not rescue. Her eyes glistened. I wasn't trying to punish you. I know, he said quickly. I figured that out after I stopped sulking. That tugged a tiny smile from her. You were sulking? She asked. He nodded. Professionally, very efficiently. She shook her head, wiping at her cheek. I'm sorry too, she said. I drew a hard line because I was scared. Scared that if I let you help, I'd turn into a story you tell at a gala. Or that I'd owe you something I couldn't repay. You don't owe me anything, he said. Not for money, not for anything. He stepped closer. I realized something, he said quietly. I don't want to help you from above. I want to build something with you, side by side. For your mom, for people like her, for the kid I used to be in Newark. For the girl you were in Miami at that kitchen table. Her throat worked as she swallowed. What does that even look like? She whispered. It looks like this, he said. We take your notebook system, your real, lived experience, and we build a program out of it. A real one, through the foundation. You design it, you lead it. We pilot it in Detroit, Atlanta, Houston, wherever you think it'll hit hardest. I fund it, yes. But it's your name, your curriculum, your voice. He took another step, close enough now to see the tiny scar by her eyebrow again. And on the personal side, he added, softer, if I help with your mom's medicine, it's because I'm in your life, not because you're on my payroll. We can call it whatever makes you feel safest. A loan, a partnership, a line item in a joint plan. I don't care what the label is. I just don't want you to carry it alone anymore. Tears slipped down her cheeks now. That feels like a lot, she whispered. A lot of trust. It is, he said. I'm asking you to trust me, not to turn you into a charity case. And I'm trusting you not to run the second I screw up and reach for my wallet instead of my words. She laughed through her tears. You will screw up. I know, he said. So will you. That's kind of the point. He took a breath that felt like the scariest investment he'd ever made. And there's one more thing, he said. I need you to know this isn't just about guilt, or hero syndrome, or fixing some childhood trauma. Somewhere between the cereal aisle in Brooklyn and your stove in Queens, I fell in love with you. Danny. The words settled between them, fragile and undeniable. She stared at him, tears shining like tiny stars. You… What? She whispered. I love you, he repeated, voice steady now. Not because you're strong or resourceful or good with numbers, though you are all of that. I love you because you see through my money straight to the scared kid underneath, and you still stay, even when it would be easier to walk away. She closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing against a wave, then opened them again, meeting his. I told myself gratitude wasn't love, she said hoarsely. And it's not. But I am grateful. For what you've learned. For what you've tried to be. And she faltered. He waited. I love you too, she finished, the words trembling but sure, which terrifies me, but not enough to go back to pretending I only care about survival. Relief flooded him so fast his knees nearly gave. Okay, he breathed. Okay. He stepped one more inch closer. So, he said, voice barely above a whisper now. Do we try to figure this out, on purpose? Budgets, boundaries, bad habits, all of it? She nodded, tears spilling freely now, but her smile was the brightest he'd ever seen. On purpose, she said, no more autopilot. And for the first time since their fight, the distance between them disappeared. Not just physically, but in all the invisible places they'd been afraid to bridge. They were both still scared. But for once, fear wasn't running the show. They were together. On purpose. The joke came full circle 3 months later. Only this time, nobody was laughing at the wrong thing. They were standing on a small stage in a community center in Detroit, facing a room of 30 people, single parents, college students, a retired bus driver, a couple who'd driven in from Atlanta after hearing about the program online. On a banner behind them, in simple blue letters, it read, The Alvarez Cole Financial Life Project. Real stories, real numbers, real change. Danny adjusted the microphone, glancing at Ethan. He gave her a small nod. You okay? He whispered. She took a breath, felt her heart pounding, and smiled. Terrified, she whispered back. But not of the math. She turned to the crowd. Hi, she said. I'm Danny. I used to sit at a table like the one in the back there with a stack of overdue bills and a calculator that I thought hated me. A few people chuckled. I thought, she continued, that money was this mysterious thing other people understood. People with degrees and suits and big offices in New York and Chicago. People like him. She jerked her thumb playfully toward Ethan. The room laughed a little louder this time. He's Ethan, she said. He runs one of those big companies. And for a long time, he knew how to grow money, but not how to live with it. He stepped up beside her. She's not wrong, he said, earning another ripple of laughter. I could tell you the market outlook in San Francisco, but not how much my own groceries cost. Until she dragged me to a store and made me choose between $10 bread and my dignity. Donnie shook her head, smiling. We're here because both of us, from opposite sides of the bank account, were ruled by fear. Fear of not having enough. Fear of losing what we had. Fear of letting anyone else in on the truth. She held up a worn spiral notebook. This, she said, saved my life, not because it made me rich, but because it made me honest. It forced me to look at my numbers and say, okay, this is where I am. This is what I can change. This is what I can't. Ethan held up a smaller black notebook. And this, he said, saved mine. Because it made me realize that all the zeros in the world can't fix a life you're living by accident. Danny taught me how to make decisions on purpose. I'm still learning. I screw up. That's why we made this project about real stories, not perfection. They looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Danny turned back to the room. We're going to talk about budgets today, she said. But more importantly, we're going to talk about shame, about how to stop letting money decide what you're worth. Hands went up. Stories spilled out about eviction notices in Houston, medical bills in Atlanta, bad credit in Los Angeles, the constant grind of almost enough. Danny listened, nodding, sharing pieces of her own journey. Ethan listened too, and when it was his turn to speak, he didn't hide behind jargon. I grew up in a house where red letters on envelopes meant yelling in the kitchen, he said. I told myself I'd never feel that fear again, so I built walls out of money. I thought if I was rich enough, fear couldn't touch me. He looked out at the faces. It still did, he admitted, just in different ways. I was terrified of losing what I had, terrified of making one wrong move and watching it all crumble. Danny didn't just show me how to budget. She showed me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you scared and stay anyway. Donnie's chest tightened. She reached for his hand, their fingers lacing together in front of everyone, no longer pretending this was just a professional partnership. After the session, people lined up to talk, to ask questions, to say thank you. A young woman in a faded hoodie approached, clutching a notebook of her own. I always thought budgets were for rich people, she said quietly, like something you do when you have extra. But, hearing you two, it makes me think maybe it's something I can do too. Even now, even like this. You can, Danny said, one line at a time, one choice at a time. Ethan added, and if anyone tells you money is too complicated for you, send them to us. We'll be happy to prove them wrong. They stayed long after the workshop officially ended, answering questions until the chairs were stacked and the lights flickered. Later, back at their hotel room, not the penthouse, not the tiny studio, but a modest place, somewhere in between, they collapsed onto the bed, shoes kicked off, notebooks spread between them. You were amazing, Ethan said, turning to look at her. So were you, she said. I've never seen you talk about your dad like that. He shrugged, a little vulnerable. You made it safe enough. She brushed a thumb over the back of his hand. How's your fear level? She asked. High, he said honestly, but manageable. Like the budget. I know it's there. I know what it costs me. And I know what I'm choosing anyway. Which is? She asked. He rolled onto his side, facing her fully. You, he said simply. Us. This. Building something that can't be bought. Not really. It can be funded, sure. But it has to be lived. She smiled, eyes shining. Good answer, she said. Very on theme. He laughed, then sobered. You know what's funny? He said. The night this all started, I asked you for financial advice as a joke. She remembered, the way he'd leaned against the counter, cocky, bored. The way she'd looked him in the eye and said, First, I'd save you from your own money. Yeah, she said softly. You did. He reached for her hand. So, he murmured, echoing that night, but with all the weight of what they'd lived since. If I ask you again now, not as a joke, but as the man who loves you, what's your financial advice for me, Danny? She pretended to think, though the answer was already sitting warm in her chest. First, she said, her voice thick with affection, I'd make sure you never confuse your net worth with your heart again. Then, I'd tell you to invest heavily in long-term assets. Such as? He asked, playing along. She scooted closer, their foreheads almost touching. Family, she said, community, and one slightly bossy, notebook-obsessed woman from Queens. He smiled, emotion tightening his throat. Sounds like a solid portfolio, he said. Very low risk, she teased. As long as you keep being honest. On purpose. He kissed her then, slow and sure. In a way that felt less like fireworks and more like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. No chandeliers, no headlines, no spreadsheets. Just two people who had learned, the hard way, that love needed the same thing good money management did. Attention. Intention. The courage to tell the truth. Months later, back in Manhattan, the penthouse looked different. There were still glass windows and art on the walls. But there were also signs of life now. A second mug by the sink, a stack of dog-eared budgeting workbooks on the coffee table, a framed photo of Danny, her mom, Ethan, and Maya at a tiny restaurant in Miami, all laughing at something off camera. The kitchen, once a pristine museum, was now their favorite room. One evening, Danny stood at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce. This time, not store brand, not the most expensive either, just good. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Remember when you told me I'd have to live like one of you?" he murmured. She smiled. "You say that like there's still a you and a me." He squeezed gently. "You know what I mean," he said. "You were right. It saved me. From my own money. From myself. And you saved me from thinking I wasn't allowed to want more than survival," she said. "We're even." "Not a bad trade," he said. He reached over and turned down the heat under the pot. "Careful," she said. "You're going to burn it." He kissed her cheek. "I'd rather burn dinner than live the rest of my life on autopilot again." They stood there a moment, listening to the hum of the city through the glass, the quiet bubbling of the sauce, the soft rhythm of each other's breathing. Two kids from scared kitchens, Newark and Miami, who had somehow found their way to a life where fear didn't get the final say. Money still mattered. It always would. Bills had to be paid. Decisions had to be made. Markets rose and fell in New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and beyond. But now, money was a tool, not a master. And love, unexpected, messy, chosen on purpose, was the thing they built everything else around. The billionaire who once asked his maid for financial advice as a joke now asked her about everything that mattered: how to live, how to give, how to stay. And every time, her first words were the same, in one form or another: let's decide on purpose, together. In the end, that was their greatest wealth.